Hello, Adult Sunday School leaders. We are in our second week of the unit entitled More Than Enough, How Jesus Meets Our Deepest Needs. We're looking at several I am statements, all out of the Gospel of John. This week, we're looking at our need for direction out of John chapter 8. And the point of this lesson is that Jesus is the light who reveals the way we should go. The I am statement that we're looking at this week is when Jesus says, I am the light of the world. If you want to refer back to a previous prep talk I did just a few weeks ago, it was January 31st. That prep talk, we looked at the Matthew 5 statement where Jesus says, you are the light of the world. And I made a distinction there about why Jesus said, you are the light of the world in Matthew 5. And over here in John chapter 8, he says, I am the light of the world. So if you want to go back and refer to that and bring that out again, you might possibly want to do that. Now, I believe that the context of what Jesus is saying is very important. And when we understand exactly what was going on and what was happening when Jesus was saying these things, it really sheds light, no pun intended. Well, actually, pun was intended. It sheds light on the Scripture. It illuminates the Scripture. And even though we can take these statements out of context and we can just read them on their own, and it has meaning to us when we understand what was going on in the culture and in the hearts and minds of the people who originally heard these sayings of Jesus, it makes it even more so real to us. So that's what I want to specifically look at today. The first thing I want to look at as far as the context goes is, when did this happen? When did Jesus say, I am the light of the world? Well, we look back just the previous chapter in John chapter 7, verse 2, we can see that this is during the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles. It's the same festival, just has different names. So we know when this was being said, during this feast time, this Feast of the Booths or the Tabernacles. But then we want to ask, where specifically was Jesus when he said these things? This is also outside of our scripture text for the week. We look down at the right after this in chapter 8, verse 20, and we see that Jesus spoke these words in the temple treasury. Well, that doesn't mean anything to us. Is this a Fort Knox type room that's sealed or whatever? No, the temple treasury was in the court of women. Now, if you remember and you might want to find some pictures, some diagrams of what the temple looked like during the time of Jesus, but you had the temple itself, and the outer court was the court of Gentiles, that anybody could go into that. And then a little bit smaller area was called the court of women, so Jewish women could go into that. This is where the temple treasury was, and there were 13, they were called trumpets because they had a narrow mouth, and it opened up to a wider base, and it kind of looked like what a trumpet would look like. So each of these 13 trumpets were little piggy banks, so to speak, and they each had a specific purpose, and some of them were for specific offerings. And so these were actually the first recorded instance we have in Scripture of designated funds. So what happened here, Jesus was in this court. He was in the court of women. And it didn't mean that just women could be there. That was as far as women could go in the temple area. Gentiles could only go so far. Women could go Jewish women could go a little bit further, and so it went. So during this Feast of Tabernacles or Feast of Booths, there were two important celebrations that happened during this time, and one of those was called the illumination of the temple. So at the end of the first day of the Feast of the Tabernacles, forged huge lamps or huge candelabras were prepared, and when it got dark, they were lit. Now, where were these located? They were located in the court of women. And it was said that those candelabras were so bright that it was said to light up every courtyard in the city. And so they lit these at dusk, and they stayed on all night long. Now, let's think back to last week's lesson when Jesus said, I am the bread of life. He's doing a very similar thing here. If you remember, he had fed several thousand people. They were coming to look. They were looking for him for that free handout of food, And Jesus basically said, you're looking for food that perishes, but I am the bread of life. Basically saying, I'm the bread of life that is forever. And so what he's saying here is that Jesus uses that situation in real life to basically say, I'm the complete fulfillment of this. You're seeking after bread that satisfies a hunger for a while, but I am the bread of life that eternally satisfies. And so this week it's a similar situation, I believe. He's in this area, this court of women, the treasury area. It's during the Feast of Tabernacles. They've had that lighting ceremony. And that light was on for about 12 hours or so. And Jesus says, I am the complete fulfillment of this. I am the light. Not just of this temple court, not just of Jerusalem, but I am the light of the world for eternity. So you see, knowing a little bit about the background of where Jesus was when he said these things really helps, like I said, bring light to the Scripture. It really helps us understand what he was saying, why he was saying it, and what it meant to those original hearers. Now, just want to remind you that I'm out this Sunday. Ruth and I are going to South Carolina to visit baby Henry, who's not a baby anymore. He's 16 months or so. And we might actually visit Sarah and Andrew while we're there as well. So hopefully next week, while I'm in South Carolina, I'll have a chance to look at the following week's lesson and give you a little prep talk from there, a little remote prep talk, so to speak. So anyway, that's all for now. I hope you have a great lesson, and I will see you not Sunday, but the next Sunday.